All of the views and opinions expressed here are those of the individual speaking and may not be representative of Konig American. At times, language may be considered vulgar. Listener discretion is suggested.
You are now listening to the Konig Behind the Wheel podcast.
Okay, let's see. All right, we're live. Luke Munnell, veteran automotive photographer and car addict. Are you ready for a 10-question quickfire?
I am. Let's do it.
All right. Civic or Integra?
Integra.
What would you rather shoot, Grid Life or one of the IMSA events?
Honestly, I like both. I'm going to have to pick IMSA.
Okay. Yeah, I figured you might, just because that's kind of, you've started to play with that in the past few years.
Yeah.
Favorite car that you've ever owned?
I've never really owned any good cars. I have my Integra now, which is why I chose Integra for Civic or Integra. My first car was a Civic. It was a B-Series car. I put an LS in it on nitrous. That was a lot of fun. And then after that, it got T-boned at a stop sign, so I parted it out. I got a 240. It was an S13.
Okay.
Did an SR swap in that. That was by far, I think, my favorite car.
Yeah.
And then after that, it's all been either just like daily drivers or, project cars like my Integra. But that 240 was pretty fun. I like that.
You've had a few BMWs too, right?
Just the one. I have a 325i now just as a daily.
Yeah.
I'm going to leave it totally stock. I'm not going to mess with it.
Okay.
Yeah, mostly because I don't really know how. But
well, you got to have all sorts of special tools and know-how for that guy.
I got a torque set recently, but there's other stuff that I haven't gotten into yet, and I want to kind of keep it that way if possible.
I'm with you. Let's see, turbo or NA?
Ooh, that's tough, man. Turbo is always more fun, but NA, I think if you can get the same power level, NA is just better.
Yeah. K24 or a B16?
K24. I've only owned B series, but I mean,
come
on, K24.
I know. Skyline or Supra?
Ooh, that's tricky. I'm gonna go with Supra just because of the 2JZ.
Import tuner or Honda tuning?
Ooh, that's tricky. Import tuner, because we used to do fun Honda stuff there too, but we also did fun Nissan stuff and Toyota stuff, and yeah.
So one piece of gear that you want but don't own?
Well, actually, there's the next thing I'm going to buy is probably a pair of Nikon D850s. So I'm still shooting with 810s and D3s for the sports stuff.
Yeah.
And I recently tried an 850. My buddy Nate Hassler.
They're incredible.
That's amazing. You can shoot. It focuses fast. It's fast burst rate. It's high resolution. It's everything that I need in a camera. So I'm going to sell all my stuff as soon as I get some of it back from the repair shop, and then I'm going to just switch over to 850s.
All right. So let's say you had to sell all of your gear except for one body and one lens. What combo do you keep?
It's funny, but I'm going to keep one of my D3s and my 400 2.8 because I love those lenses, that lens, and I love those cameras. They're only 12 megapixel, but they're built like tanks. The color's great. They're fast.
Wow.
Yeah.
I got the lens. The body is what threw me, but
yeah.
So I know you currently shoot Nikon, but you've shot with both. So for photo, Nikon or Canon? I'm pretty sure I know where this is going.
I'm going to go with Nikon. Yeah, but the margin isn't high. I liked Canon. When I had Canon, I owned some cheaper gear, and it all went bad at the same time. And I found good deals on Nikon stuff, so I switched.
Right.
And I liked some things about Nikon a little better. The glass, I think, is better and sharper. I like the build quality, and the camera bodies now with the 850 is amazing.
Right.
But I do like the image processing in the Canons a little better. I like the colors from Canon a little better.
Yeah, I get that. All right, I'm Scott. I'm the marketing director for Konig Wheels, and our guest today is Luke Munnell. If you're a car person that has ever scrolled through Instagram, read about car builds on random websites, looked over event coverage from some of the most popular events in motorsports, or have read magazines such as Super Street Modified, Import Tuner, Honda Tuning, and the list just seems to go on, then you know Luke's work. Luke has been producing images that are so incredible you can often smell the race gas while you're staring at them. In my opinion, he is on a short list with some of the greatest automotive photographers. If you don't believe me, head over to his website and look at his images, because I'm telling you, some of these things look so altered because they're so incredibly unbelievable that it would just blow your socks off. So we'll give you his website down below, and you can go through that. Luke, I appreciate you doing this because I'm sure that you have plenty of things to do.
Yeah, well, thanks for having me. I've seen quite a few of these, and yeah, I'm into it. So thank you.
Thanks. Yeah, we're starting to do something. We're not exactly sure where it's going, but
Well, that's
so
the start of anything, right? You just try it and kind of
that's
figure it out
exactly
as
what
you
it
go.
is. That's exactly what it is. It's just like, you know what, you've done so many of the same things for so long. You just want to stretch your legs in a different direction.
Hmm.
And the one thing that I think we've always been pretty good about is that we have all these different relationships of people that we've had, for so many years, and everybody's got a story. And unfortunately, it seems like the one thing that's getting lost. There's so much media that's being developed nowadays, but the one thing that seems to be getting lost are some of the stories that kind of brought us to these points, or what happens
Yeah,
behind the scenes. They just don't seem to make it through because everything is so quick paced and you know flip through feeds.
yeah, it's true.
So you're a slight shift in some of the guests that we've had on so far. We've had drivers, we've had editors, we've had content creators, we've had YouTubers. And again, I know you're a content creator too, and we'll kind of dive into that at some point. But you're the first pro photographer that we've had on, which kind of changes things up a little bit.
Cool.
Yeah, so I wanted to give some people some context as to why it's important that I thought you could be on, and kind of what they can expect in what we're going to pull out here. You've been covering our industry for, I'm going to say, well over 15 years now.
Yeah, I think I started in 2003, 2002 or three.
Yeah.
So
So, I
yeah.
mean, yeah, you're there already. Your
Hmm.
work is amongst some of the most memorable out there. And if anybody has, kind of had an infamy for Super Street, or a lot of covers, all their favorite import magazines, there's no doubt that they have looked at your work so many times and they just don't have any clue.
Yeah, I
You
think
know?
that's true. Yeah, yeah.
I just want people to see our industry from the other side.
Hmm.
Media has become so important that I would argue that the popularity of photography has increased, and our life seems to really, it just revolves around images and media. Everything we
Hmm.
do is absolutely just about consumable media. So this was kind of an opportunity for photo junkies to kind of hear what it's like from your point of view. It also, kind of what does it take to be an automotive photographer? What kind of things does it take? What kind of moments, what is it
Hmm.
like to capture moments that are the ones that we are kind of left with and what are engraved into our memories?
Yeah, yeah.
And often the images that you capture are the sole exposure that a lot of people will ever have with some of these events. They're not going to get to them. They're never going to be, at an IMSA or, some of these 24-hour Le Mans, but like the images that you guys capture are what
Hmm.
is vividly what they think of every time, one of those events is mentioned.
Yeah, yeah,
And I think more than anything else, you're a real car enthusiast, which
yeah.
I don't know how you can be an automotive photographer without being one,
Yeah, I don't know either.
right?
I think some people are, but yeah, I don't understand that. I feel like especially in any enthusiast industry, you kind of start as an enthusiast and then you find your industry niche later. But yeah.
Yeah. Although I will tell you this morning, I'll date this podcast a little bit. It was back to school time, so I had to take the celebratory first day pictures of both my kids going back to school.
Oh
So
yeah.
I had the camera out, lined up everything, and I couldn't get anybody to smile for anything. So all I wanted to do was just
Yeah.
lose my cool. But at that moment, I wish that I was photographing a car, because at least it would just not.
It's true. There's a lot behind that. I have a lot of friends
Oh,
who are wedding photographers. They do engagements, they
yeah.
do portraits, and that's all well and good. I have a lot of respect for them, but I couldn't do it just because it's not. I don't know. Like I deal with people well enough when I know them and we have the common
Right.
ground of being in automotive or whatever the case is. But to just go to a stranger's event on the most important day of their life and generate these photos that they're going to look at and their children are going to look at, and those photos aren't going anywhere ever.
Right.
That's a huge commitment. That's like tattooing somebody.
Oh, yeah.
And I mean the pressure that goes with that, I can't even. I mean, if I screw up a car shoot, most of the time I can redo it,
Right.
or I'll have a million chances to get it right on the spot. But
Well, so
yeah.
I have some friends that are, that are wedding photographers, and the one thing that I always thought was them was I realized how much of their job really is in their body language, communication, how
Yeah.
their I don't want to say bedside manner, but you know what I mean.
Yep,
Um,
totally.
because there's so many pieces about making people feel good on their day, and taking people that aren't models or don't know how to pose in front of a camera, making them feel comfortable in front of a
Mhm.
camera. It's interesting how a camera has this incredible ability to make people lock up and just go,
Yeah.
statue like.
Yeah. You know, it's funny. I think the camera signifies the presence of everybody else, you know, watching you. And
Right.
when you go from that moment of having the spotlight shown on you, that engages your fight or flight instinct. You either
Yeah.
turn
Love
it
it
on
or
and you
you.
perform, or you just
Yes.
freeze up deer in headlights. You
Yeah.
know, and it's funny because that happens with still cameras, but it happens, I think, with video just far more often. You know, when people get in front of a camera and they have to do an interview or whatever the case is, it's just one or the other. You know, either
I
they're
agree.
into it and they win, or they're just, you know.
Yeah. So you got into automotive photography. Was that where you started? Is that how you got into photography?
No, it's funny. I actually I started skateboarding. My whole from like when I was 12, I saw this movie on vacation one time, Gleaming the Cube. If anybody knows skateboarding from like the 80s, they'll know that movie. It's iconic.
Okay.
I watched that. That got me into skateboarding. And from 12 to like 17, all I wanted to do was skateboard. So
Okay.
I bought and read all the magazines. Transworld was my favorite. Thrasher, Big Brother, all those guys were good. And then the more I skated, the more I read these magazines, the more I started to kind of fall in love with the actual production of the content. You know, like the photography,
Right.
especially in Transworld, was amazing. The writing was great, second to none. I mean, good, honest journalism in those magazines. It wasn't, and Big Brother was funny, and Transworld was serious, and Thrasher was edgy, and they all had their personalities. But you know, the older I got, the more I started to realize I had to pick a career. I started thinking, well, maybe I want to get into publishing, and skateboarding photography would be a good one, and writing would be something I could do also. So that's kind of like where I started to really think of journalism as a career, was those skateboarding magazines more than anything.
Right. So where did you make the jump into automotive photography?
I think after my first year in school, I started to realize that it's kind of prohibitively expensive to get into skateboard photography because everybody was switching to medium format, and this is maybe
Oh,
like mid to late 90s, and
sure.
the transition to digital hadn't come yet. But I just couldn't really, you know, get into it the way I wanted to, and I didn't, living in Pittsburgh, I didn't really have. I mean, there's some talented skateboarders there, but no professionals, nobody I could, you know, work with and try to, like, you know, get into the mainstream. But I did have a lot of guys who were building cars, and the car scene was just coming up, and I started getting into that just because I liked cars, you know, and the more I got into that, the more I started to really become obsessed by cars in general, you know, and like just the mechanics of it. And I think I put photography and writing all to the side for a while, and I just strictly got into cars.
Right.
And then after a year, 2 years of that, I thought, you know, why don't I just do automotive journalism instead of skateboarding? And that's kind of where it went.
Right. So then, so you were in that transition of you learned on film, and then you had to make that jump into digital.
Yeah.
Was that? I mean, you're an inherently young guy. It's not like you were a photographer for 30 years, you know, with film. But was that a hard transition, or was that kind of like a simple? You picked it up and moved forward.
It was easy. I remember,
Yeah.
so when I learned how to shoot, it was all black and white film, and I
Right.
like that too. That's, maybe we can get into that in a little
Sure.
bit, but
Yeah.
I loved the darkroom process. I loved, you know, like just the whole craft behind film.
Right.
But when you're trying to do something like capture an event, it's kind of hard because you've got 36 rolls or 36 frames per roll, and you know your speed of your shutter is limited, not
Sure.
shutter, but your speed of your motor drive is limited, and it's kind of impractical.
Right.
So the first few events I went and shot on film, I probably shot 6 or 10 rolls, and you have to be very careful of what you shoot and very selective.
Right.
And then you know, years later when I finally made that jump to digital, it was just, I mean, it's amazing. You get free
incredible.
frames. You know, you can just shoot as much as you want. You know, buy memory cards and buy
Right.
battery chargers, and I mean, you're completely free to try all these new things.
Yeah.
So I like.
So I was, you know, I'm kind of a photography nerd, not hobbyist at best. But so one of the things I started on film also, and one of the things that was interesting for me was that being able to chimp the back of a digital camera was like the biggest thing for me. I think I even got much better once I had that ability, only for the sake that I didn't have to wait. Like, it was real-time learning, real-time feedback. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I knew, like, when I was off on exposure, it was so clear to me, you know? But, so, would you remember what the first camera you shot with was?
Yeah, I had a Canon EOS A2. Well, no, the first camera I ever shot with was, my dad had a Canon 650, I want to say,
Okay.
35 millimeter film camera, and just for like, I mean, just shooting random stuff, probably our birthdays and things like that. But
Right.
that's the first thing I messed around with. But then when I finally bought a camera, it was an A2, And, with Canon and the EOS line, like Nikon and their older film bodies, any lens you buy, you can swap over to the digital stuff too. So that's why I stayed with Canon for a while, because I had already bought some lenses and whatnot. But yeah, that was the first camera. And then the first digital camera was a 20D. I bought it literally the day it went live on B&H Photo. Got that. I got a bunch of stuff with it, a couple of lenses, got a laptop, and that's kind of where it really started.
Right. So you're pretty heavy, like you mentioned it before, but you're a pretty heavy car guy. So give me a quick rundown where that love for cars really kind of became that overwhelming piece.
It's tough. I think so I had a friend that I used to know through skateboarding. I think that's the connection. He just started getting more into cars on his own, and he got a Acura Integra in 2001. It was brand new GSR, and turbocharged it because there was a guy who owned a speed shop that was looking for a car to like demo some products on, and gave him a deal on it. And he and I were just kind of like loosely friends, but we met somewhere just completely at random, and his car was there, and we were catching up, like, hey, what have you been up to? And he said, I've been building this car, and that was all foreign to me. And I was like, oh, can I go for a ride? And he's like, sure. So we go out on the freeway, and he hits maybe from 30 to 130 in like what seemed like 3 seconds. And I'm like, oh my God, this is amazing. I was driving this bone stock hand-me-down Ford Escort at the time, and not the cool Escorts like in Europe. This was like a fuchsia. Yeah.
Right.
And I was like, that moment just changed my whole perspective on cars. And then I started from there getting into because I was getting ready to get a car for myself, and I was thinking, what should I get? And I had no idea. And then I started thinking about the imports more.
Right.
So I bought a couple of magazines, probably Sport Compact Car, Super Street, and then it just all snowballed from there, man. I found more people in my little area of southwestern Pennsylvania who were into cars, and we just would hang out and talk about mods and go to the local drag strip and things like that. And that's really where it came from. We never got into road racing or drifting. It was all just building fast street cars back then.
Yeah, well, I guess drifting at that point was almost non-existent, especially on the East Coast.
Oh, totally. I mean, sometimes there was always one guy who had like these JDM option videos, and we would see, oh, this is so cool, But,
we just can't figure out how to do it. Partly because we all have front-wheel drive cars, and the other guy was driving a Mustang.
Right, with an open diff.
Right.
Like, I can't get this thing.
Right, can't get this. Right, this thing won't do anything.
But yeah, that's definitely where it started.
Do you remember the first car you shot? Was it your friend's car, or was that?
No, it's funny. I shot a bunch of events. I think it was the summer of 2003. There was always this big car show at Carlisle State Fairgrounds.
Sure.
Which, if anybody knows cars on the East Coast, Carlisle.
Carlisle events, yeah.
Yeah, so we would go there for the import show. And I think one year I shot that. That was the first thing I ever did. And then I think I actually emailed John Naderi, because he was at Super Street.
Yeah.
And I emailed Scott Oldham at Sport Compact Car just a couple of slides and said, hey, I was at this show. No, I scanned those and I emailed them. And I said, hey, I was at this show. I have these images if you're interested. And I think John had already had somebody booked, but Scott was into it. And he said, if you can make it out to this race or this race or this race, let me know. You can shoot for us, So maybe a month or two later, I went out to a drag race at Atco in New Jersey, shot that event, sent the slides. This was on film. Shot that, sent the slides over to Scott, and he ran them in SEC. And that was my first actual job, But so I was all into doing events. I went to car shows. I went to, hot import nights and different drag races. And I was a little hesitant on shooting a car feature because it just wasn't anything I was looking at. And I didn't have flashes or understood how any of that stuff worked yet, So I think I did a lot of that, probably for a year or 2 years. And then the first feature I ever shot was for Performance Auto and Sound magazine. It was a 350Z that I went and shot in Maryland. And it was super basic. Those photos are probably still online somewhere. They ended up taking one of them and using it for the cover shot. So on my very first shoot, I got cover. I was super excited about that. I did not deserve it. There was a lot of post-processing that went into that cover that I didn't do.
Right.
But it looked good, and I showed people my photo on cover, and they didn't understand it either. They just thought it was awesome. And I think that probably had that was a big boost to my little budding career at the time.
What's interesting is that the piece of the puzzle that you just said there, I think that's such a big, important part. So you're getting started, and I don't want to say career, but, because maybe it wasn't established at that point, that's what it was going to be. But you took the initiative to basically take your work and kind of say, hey, look, here's my images, here's stuff I've already done, rather than try to look for them to give you a job. You said, here's what I've already done. You know what I mean? So, and I think that that's key for even people today. Like if you want to advance yourself at something, like bring people like what you can do, rather than try to say, like, give me the opportunity to do something for you. You know?
Yeah, I totally know. I think, it's funny. I don't know what it is, what causes this, but in our American culture, there's this assumption that like hard work and dedication and will are the keys to success, and they are sometimes, but really you have to look at everything from what you can do for other people. If there's no client, if there's no customer base for what you're offering, you're not gonna find it. You're not gonna make it. So, if you want to be successful doing something, you got to find the people who are looking for your skills, and you got to show them what you can do, and then take it from there. It doesn't matter how hard you work if you're working at something that nobody really is in the market for.
Right.
But, that being said, if you find that and you are willing to work harder than the next guy, it's going to work out for you, I think, a little better.
Yeah. When did you know what was that a specific point that you knew this is what you were going to do for a living?
What's funny? I think when I moved out to California, I think so in a few years, I think between 2005 and 2007, I was still living in Pittsburgh. I was working as a bartender. I was doing freelance photography, just mostly events, but I think at that time I was doing more features than anything.
Right.
And it was going really well. And there's this moment where my friend Clint, who was our art director for Import Tuner, who I'd met, a year before.
Yeah.
He mentioned to me that the Import Tuner was looking for a technical editor, and that I should apply. And I thought, I have all the qualifications. I always wanted to live in California. This would be my chance to actually do it full time.
Right.
And it's funny because like it was everything I wanted. It was everything I was kind of working toward, was this opportunity. There it was. And I was still a little hesitant. I thought, do I really want to do it? Do I really want to change my life? And I did. And that it wasn't before that moment that I felt like I was going to actually do it. But when I started down that road and I went out for the interviews and I met everybody and I decided to actually move, that's the only time it really felt like, okay, I've actually chosen a path, sort of.
Right. What was your kind of education or your background in learning photography? Was it kind of all self-doing, or did you have kind of some formal training there?
No, I went to school for journalism. I finished 3 years and I moved out here before I could finish my fourth, so I never finished. But but I went far enough. I did journalism and I did a minor in business management. But as part of the journalism curriculum, we did some photography, but it was mainly you were learning from people about pure photojournalism, like shooting local events, going to sporting events, things like that, which was fine, but it wasn't what I was into, and like the feature stuff and the lighting and the portraiture, and that was all separate from what I learned. So that I want to say I'm self-taught, but really it was just a matter of just finding other people who are really good at it, finding real good examples of it out there in magazines and online, and just trying to dissect it. Think like, where were the lights set up for this one? And
right.
Sorry, that.
You're fine.
Yeah, that kind of thing.
But so I think what's interesting about that is I saw it, even with my skills, is that I started it out by mimicking and trying to do things, because once I figured out how to do them, I had the knowledge of how to do it. But then you can sort of get to this point where you start to develop kind of your own niche. You start to develop your own look and kind of feel for things, and all of a sudden, while you have those skills, how to replicate, you start to kind of diverge and kind of go in different directions with, kind of with your own taste and style and composition and things like that. So I think that's an interesting piece.
Yeah, I think so. And I think that's the way I think most craftsmanship and creativity goes, is you've got to learn from people who are better than you, who have already done it. And then, once you learn their techniques and you learn some of the things that they put into their work, you start to think, well, I could do this differently and it would still be good. Or I could do this and it would still work. And that's where you start to go off on your own and develop your own style. And I think that's important. If you look at car making, Japanese cars, for example, back in the day, they looked a lot like American and European cars, but now totally different, because they went down that same path too.
Right. And you can start to see, in some respects, you start to see some of the American, quote unquote, American companies copying Japanese styling cues.
Oh, yeah.
Totally. Especially the Europeans. I mean, that's been done for a long time, so that's no news there. When you decided you were going to be a quote-unquote pro photographer, What did your family and friends say about that? Was it kind of like, yeah, expected? It was like, or was it kind of like, you should get a real job kind of thing?
It's funny. I think my mom always wanted me to be like an engineer or a doctor or something, like everybody's mom, And then there were a couple points, I think, in my teen years where it went from that, to just being like, well, as long as he doesn't wind up in prison or dead, that's pretty good. So,
setting the bar high.
Yeah. So I think when I finally settled on something, I think they were probably happy that I was just choosing something, instead of floating around. But my friends, it's different because you tell your friends you want to do something like be an automotive photographer in California, and they think, yeah, whatever, like people say these things all the time, and they don't follow through with it that much. So I don't think anybody really realized that I was going to do it until I actually did it. And by that point, it had been such a long process. It took years to actually get going and ramp up to this that it was just gradual. I don't think anybody thought anything different of it. They just thought, well, that's Luke and what he's doing, and it's working out for him to some extent.
Yeah. So I'm going to take a quick sidestep here because I want to get your opinion on this. I've spoken to some of my friends that are photographers, and just kind of this random question we always have, which is, so there's always this kind of weird debate about when somebody considers themselves a quote-unquote professional photographer.
Yeah,
so,
totally.
Listen, there's a lot of talented photographers out there. There's a lot of talented hobbyists out there. There's a lot of people that know how to operate a camera, that do have some, vision, that do have some, skill with composition, that produce nice images. So I guess that's where the struggle seems to come in, right? Where's that blur?
Yeah.
But there's also a lot of people out there that don't have a lick of skill, that are really quick to put, BS watermarks on photos that aren't very good, and they dub themselves, I'm a photographer, right?
Yeah.
So, and we hear that term a lot, photographer, and it almost kind of muddies the water of what a real photographer is.
Yep.
So I guess my question is, where do you feel that line is drawn between that talented hobbyist and that real professional photographer? We know the definition of it, but where do you feel it lays?
I think if you were to say, if you're looking for a distinction of hobbyist versus artist, I'd say that is a lot blurrier. But hobbyist and professional, it's actually pretty clear. I think the only real defining characteristic is if you do it full-time exclusively and that's how you make your living, then you can consider yourself a professional. And there's varying levels. I mean, there are a lot of professional photographers who are, much better than I am, to be perfectly blunt, but if we're all doing it and making a living off of it, then I think we're all professional photographers. The other thing to keep in mind is whether you're a professional photographer, writer, whatever it is you call yourself a professional at, whatever you do is only half the job. The rest of it is your dependability, your professionalism, and if you're actually if you're supplying your clients with all those things, if they know they can count on you to get something done, to be available, to not have to work around a day job, all those things I think go into whether or not you can consider yourself a professional. Yeah.
So and there's a couple things we'll bring up and we'll touch on later, kind of jumping back into that whole part of the business aspect of kind of where you jumped off. But so you move out to California and you start working for these magazines, right? Like that was your first major jump, because you did end up taking that job.
Yeah, I did.
So you get out there and you're part of the editorial staff. At that time, what was it? Still Peterson?
It had just switched. So I think I interviewed under Peterson, and then by the time I got
Source.
There, it was like a week before it became Source Interlink. So yeah, it was like literally a week, 2 weeks, and everybody was talking about the merger and that sort of thing.
Right.
So yeah, right around that time.
And for those that don't know, Source Interlink and bought, purchased the magazines from Peterson, and just so you know, they're the ones that really own Super Street, Motor Trend, Import Tuner, Honda Tuning, Modified, Turbo, Sport, Compact Car. That whole conglomerate really was under that trend, and Source Interlink had started to remove a lot of those titles and consolidate those titles, kind of as maybe some of the magazines weren't as popular or profitable, whatever it may be.
Yeah.
But that was the group that you moved out to start working for.
Yeah. So in 2007, I got that job offer. I flew out and interviewed in 2007. I got my Integra project car up and running. I put it down, painted it, rebuilt the transmission, did all kinds of stuff, and then finally drove it out. And that was 2000. That was October 2007. Roommate just walked home. What's up? Oh, cool. Thank you. So I did all that in 2007, and then from 2007 to 11, I worked there.
Right.
And it started right when Source Interlink took over for Peterson. And then through that time, two things happened. The industry kind of shrank, like print in general just got smaller because the internet was starting to, grow.
Right.
And then because they bought all these titles that were originally, thank you. Because they bought all these titles that were originally competing with each other,
right,
they didn't have a need to keep all of them alive. So they shut down Turbo, they shut down Sport Compact Car, all these things, which is always really painful for us and the readers to go through. But, it was just business. That's just what they had to do to stay alive,
right,
in that changing climate. But all that happened, and then by the time I left in 2011, things had kind of stabled out for the most part. Source Interlink stayed the way it was until the Enthusiast Network name change.
Yeah.
And then a few titles, went away here and there, but for the most part, by that time, the social media channels had ramped up. Digital involvement was huge. The magazines were stable again, and it's kind of where things are today, I think.
So, but you really kind of, were able to grit your teeth out there. That's where you were able to. I mean, like you said, you went out maybe for a technical editor job, and while writing is a huge part of it, I mean, there was a lot of things with those magazines that people don't understand. I think a lot of people looked into those magazines that weren't familiar with the behind the scenes, and they felt that there was this massive amount of staff. They just had endless amounts of photographers, right? But the truth is, when you were a quote-unquote editor, you really were left to do a lot of the whole, one-stop shopping yourself. You had to go, you shot a lot of things yourself. That's probably where you really had the opportunity to shoot and learn so many, about shooting cars, because that's what you were thrust into, right?
Oh, totally. Yeah, when I started, it's funny because I was hired as a technical editor, based mainly on my writing. Photography was always a component of it, but I wasn't a feature editor, so I wasn't really there to shoot features and covers and that sort of thing.
Right.
So especially for the first year or so, I just mainly did a lot of copy editing. I did all the tech stuff, so all the build, not all the build stuff, because Scott Sunichi was there too, and he was always very technical, so he took a lead on a lot of the project car stuff. But power pages and parts testing and reviewing and that kind of stuff I did. But I mean, there was the three of us there for most of it. It was Scott, myself, and Carter Jung as the editor. And that was it. I mean, if you had a staff of 3, that was average in those days. If you had a staff of 4, that was above average, and somebody was going to get to go. Most magazines were like 2 or 3, and we did a lot of different stuff, man. We would shoot features, go to events, do tech. We would copy edit the whole books ourselves. We'd sit down together and decide what the cover blurbs were going to be. It was very lean ship.
Man, Scott and Carter, Scott Carter and yourself, that's a pretty powerful duo, though, if you really look back at it.
He was good, I think like any team, we had our differences and would occasionally butt heads, but the good thing about that was Carter was always very pragmatic, good businessman. He was always able to see the big picture, I think, better than
smart guy.
A lot of us. Yeah, very smart guy. He's savvy. I think savvy is a real good word for him. And Scott was always just down to work. He knew a lot of people in the industry, had good connections, had a good tech background. And I was there kind of to polish up everything. I could shoot stuff after a while. I could always, write and edit stuff decently well. But even then, there was a huge learning curve. I look at my work when I started versus when I left, and it's night and day. I mean, if you want to learn how to do something, just get thrust into it, man. There's no better way to figure it out.
It's the repetition, just doing it over and over and over again, right?
I think so. Yeah.
So then you're at the magazines for 5 years, 6 years?
4, just 4. But I freelanced a couple years before that, and then after, so 4 on staff.
Okay, yeah. And then from there, you say you get this job with Mazda, am I right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so then what was your role there? Like, where did you tell us about the move from kind of saying, all right, I'm kind of done here, and I'm ready to move on to here.
Well, it's funny. It was a natural progression, I think, actually, because when you're the heyday of magazines, it was all about information. You were sharing information. I think nowadays a printed magazine is more about the actual product and having something high quality and tangible, and timeless, to have. Yeah. But back then they were periodicals. We were just giving information out. Right. But by the time throughout my career there, those 4 or 5 years, that shifted completely to digital and then social media. So by the time I left, everything that we were doing, brands were doing on their social channels. They were going out engaging with their target markets and their consumers, and they were producing content. And a lot of the brand messaging was going straight through their social channels, the way our messaging would go through Importuner, except on behalf of a brand. So I got hired to be the social media lead at Garage Team Mazda. That was Mazda USA's agency of record.
Okay.
So a lot of what I did was kind of the same thing I did at Importuner, but on behalf of one brand.
Right.
I would go to events, I would talk to people, I would communicate brand messages, shooting, writing, all that kind of stuff. But it was interesting because we had a lean ship at Importuner and Source Interlink, and business was decreasing, but social media was growing. And at ad agencies, you've got all the resources you need at your fingertips. So that part was night and day different. But as far as the actual workload, it was a lot the same.
But
different.
Did when you started to do some? I mean, like I know that you were there more in a content capacity, but you did still do some pretty decent shoots with them.
Oh yeah. I got to shoot some stuff. The other cool thing about working directly with a brand agency is that you get all this cool access. So
Right.
For 1 year, the Mazda 787B race car came over for Monterey Motorsports reunion.
Right.
And just one day when we were all hanging out after the day had wrapped, I just happened to get a chance to shoot that thing. So
That's crazy.
I've got these cool shots of the 787B, that people always ask me about to this day, and I never would have had that access if I'd not, been in that position.
Did some of your shoots for Mazda, were they bigger production stuff, equipment that you've never really had really good access to before because of the cost? Maybe it was just cost prohibitive?
Not on the still side so much. Retouching was one benefit. It was nice to get to work with proper professional retouchers because I'm limited in what I can do, but these guys aren't. But for the most part, when I was on staff with Mazda, I didn't do a lot. Like all the stuff that I shot was mainly trailing video and broadcast productions.
Okay.
So I would get to work with my own gear and occasionally rent some things if I needed. But for the most part, it was just a kind of a component of what they were doing. And that was interesting because at first I liked that. But towards the end, I realized social media was becoming its real thing. I worked there from 2011 to early 2014, so 3 years. And during those 3 years, social media was exploding, and I realized we need to be spending a lot more money on social marketing, social content production. We need to build a team, and I was pushing maybe a little too forcefully for that, and I think the brand knew that they wanted to do that, but was a little reluctant to make it happen,
Yeah.
But it got to the point where I just wanted to produce more content and do more things in the field, rather than crunching numbers at a desk. That I just decided. I think we both kind of decided it was best that I go off on my own and work by my own attributes, I guess you could say.
But during this time, were you still doing a lot of freelance shooting?
No, when I was at Mazda, I didn't really do any. I was pretty busy.
But you left Mazda. I mean, obviously there's some other pieces there, but you left Mazda and then really you went from there. You went on to just doing your own business, right?
Yeah. And I think at first I went back to my editorial roots. So I had lunch with Bob Hernandez over at
sure.
10.
Right.
And we talked about some things that I could do. And then I talked to some other agency contacts that I had from Mazda, because when you're in that industry, you meet a lot of people, And I just kind of put the pieces together there. I think I started maybe a month or a couple months beforehand because I knew it was time for me to try something different.
Okay.
And I didn't want to just get another agency job. I really wanted to get out and produce the content, So, I took about a month or 2 months to kind of piece that together and just got started.
But I mean but that's a huge jump. It's a huge jump going from a steady salary kind of here's the job you need to do to got to find your own job. You have to start everything from scratch, keep track of your money, budget yourself out, maintain enough to live off of, right?
Yeah. And it's interesting because if you want to do it, you'll find a way. The work is there. There's more work than I can keep up with if I just go out and find it, I think. But all those things, the budgeting and the scheduling and all that, everything that goes on behind the scenes of actually doing the work, it's interesting because I was never a really great student in high school or college. I was always pretty clever, and I could always BS my way out of most situations and into good grades, but I never had those good study habits. I never had those good lifestyle habits of keeping a schedule and staying on task. But when I made that jump to freelance and I had to do it, that was another, just the switch flipped on in my head, and I realized this is very important to do these things, to budget, to watch
Right.
your money, to plan. Like
Right.
everything everybody's been telling me that I've been, fighting my whole life is
Right.
actually, to my benefit.
Right. Well, yeah, it's hard when you run out of money to keep going.
Yeah, you can't do it.
You can't do
know?
it. Well,
Yeah.
so, and I would argue that, I agree that there's a lot of work out there for people that are hungry enough to do it, that have whatever, but there's also another piece, which is talent.
Yeah.
Right? Because the truth is, you have to have the talent, you have to have the portfolio, you have to have enough kind of experience that people will trust you to do these types of this type of work. Right?
Absolutely.
And that's something that I think that a lot of people still don't lack. They're so quick to call themselves professional. They're so quick to say how great they are and how good they are and different things. But the truth is, they're too fresh into it. I mean, that would be like me right now trying to be a professional podcaster when we've done like 12 of them. It doesn't make any sense,
No, it doesn't. But I think after you've done some and you get a feel for it, I mean, the work shows you the way. So when you do podcasts, for example, you start to figure out what equipment you need. You start to figure out how the flow of things goes and how to keep the conversation moving, that sort of thing.
Right.
But before you do any of that, you have no idea. So before I ever thought I was going to be a professional independent photographer, I had an idea of what it would involve, but I didn't know until I went out and actually tried it. So that's why I started back where I felt comfortable. I went back to editorial and started working there because I knew what I needed to do to deliver to those clients. And then, from there, I think it's a matter of just, you got to look at every situation the way you pick apart a photo. You got to think, what kind of work, what kind of scheduling, what kind of pre-production goes into making this happen, to delivering to the client exactly what they want. And then you have to get out there and practice it a few times. And then when you feel comfortable, you can sell it. But you don't ever want to sell it before you're 100% on it, because you only get one try with these people. So if you go to pitch a professional agency, a professional job, and you screw it up on the first pass,
you're done.
That's it, man. You're not going to get another shot. Yeah. And word travels fast. So not only that agency, but that's a good way to ruin your reputation. So you just, as long as you're careful, as long as you do things and take a few hits to the pocketbook along the way to invest in your skills, you'll be fine.
Right. What were some of your hardest learning curves that you had, maybe running your own business?
The scheduling was a big one, I think. I mean, it's easy, but like I said, it's just nothing that I've ever placed an importance on. So it took a while for me to figure out, hey, like QuickBooks works, and it's good to keep track of, like, you set up a Google Calendar, use Google Docs, all these networking softwares that are out there, that I was always a little bit resistant to. I started looking at it and thinking, like, there's a reason these exist, and it really is to make my life easier, everybody else's life easier.
Right. And
that was the biggest one.
Do you think that would be the thing that you improved on the most over the last few years?
Yeah, absolutely. I think when you have to live, off your own merits, you start to realize the things that are really important. You got to be punctual. You got to be on time. You have to always deliver. Don't overpromise. Just be frank and straight with people. Tell them what you can do, and then make sure you deliver. Those kind of things. And then you don't ever want to run too close to the edge. You want to invest in your business, and you want to spend money if it'll make more money, but you don't want to take chances that are too great. You want to be realistic with that. I think that learning curve was probably the steepest. But the other thing too, when you're faced with a sink or swim situation, you tend to want to swim. So you're not going to throw those cautions to the wind.
Right. So for years now, you've produced just incredible images. And if you had to look back at them, is there any that you feel are some of your more memorable ones?
Yeah, I think so. That 787B shoot was really fun. I like that one. And not because it was an amazing shot or that it was just, anything particularly special happened, but it's just a good example of being able to shoot something that a lot of people are inspired by,
Right.
And at the time, like, I knew what that car was and I understood the significance behind it. But after I shot it and after I've had those images used for so many different things and so many other people just freak out thinking, wow, you got to see that car, let alone shoot it. I started thinking, like, that's really special,
Right. Those opportunities don't come like that.
No, they don't. That was one. There have been a couple of shoots. I can't think of anything off the top of my head that things have just gone really well. Like all the variables fell into place and everything that could have gone wrong didn't. Those are always nice.
Right. The ones where you don't have to play cleanup, you actually get to walk away feeling like you did the right thing.
Yeah. You're like, wow, everything went according to plan. I don't know how that happened.
Right.
Those are always nice. So I think yeah.
No, go ahead.
The first motorsports event I shot where things clicked actually wasn't until just a few years ago. But I went up to Laguna Seca to shoot Pirelli World Challenge. It was the last round of the season, I think.
Yeah.
And it was the first time I'd actually thought about like lighting, thinking, well, I'm going to shoot this corner at this time of day because this is when the lighting is going to be right. I'm not going to shoot it midday when it looks flat, And I made a little map for myself of all of the track and when the lighting I thought would be the best for what shot I wanted to get. And I did a lot of pre-production. I mean, I didn't need any rain gear for that one, but I thought about it. But in my head, I had this checklist, and even on paper, of these steps I needed to take to just make this better than the last shoots. And I went out, and that was an example of when everything just kind of went according to plan. I knew the race schedule. I knew, when to shoot which corner, which shots to get, the best lighting to get them. And I walked away from that thinking like, okay, cool. I learned something, like I took all these things for granted before I sat down and actually thought about them a little bit, more detailed. That was a memorable one.
So I think it's interesting. It's for me, like I think about my own kind of learning in photography, and first it was how to use the camera, how to really get comfortable, how not to think about what changes I need to make with aperture and and shutter speeds, and when to play with the ISO and different things, right? And then I think after that it was getting comfortable with composition, like how do I not think about trying to make things so forced, and how do I try to capture moments rather than try to position them and force them, you know what I mean? Like so I ran through that, and now something that I feel like is something that I'm always playing with is lighting. I mean, absolutely. In fact, I'd even, now that I'm kind of where I am in my own skill set, I kind of feel like that's my biggest tackle. I'm always, now my first thing every time I get the camera out is lighting. I'm always worried about like, where's the light? Like, make the light look nice. Like, does the light look good? Like, I'm so obsessed with that now. And I realize that so much of why people's images don't look good is because they don't have any understanding or give any thought to lighting. They think they just take the camera and take the picture. So I can imagine how difficult it is to, at such a big event where you have so many things going on, to really have to be like, look, I have to find the light. That's what makes these images the most memorable, and and composition, and the cars will be there. Where the track is. Those are variables that are static. They're given. That they'll be coming around the track. You don't know, obviously some timing things, but the lighting is probably what is the most, it's the piece you can't control, but you need to do your best to shape it and capture it and put it into your image the way it needs to be, portrayed.
Yeah, totally. And it's funny too, because the lighting extends to the background and foreground, not just the subject.
Exactly.
So once you get it sorted out for the subject, you start thinking like, well, the lighting is going to fall on those rocks in the background in this way, so maybe I take a bit of a sacrifice on the car to make the background stand out, or vice versa.
Right.
There's all those things you got to think about. But it's funny, I think, just because for most people, you walk around, and if you can see something, you can see it. If you see something cool, like a car coming around a corner on a racetrack, you know that it's cool. So you start shooting, and you want to capture that, and you fail to think about, well, this photo is not going to capture everything that's happening right here and how awesome it is. So you got to visually make it the best that it can be. And lighting is a big part of that. And then you got to think about like the direction and the shadow and time of day and all these different things that you normally wouldn't think at if you're just watching a race.
Yeah.
So it's not instinctive. You have to really, at least for me, it's not instinctive. You have to really think about it, I think.
Well, and I think there's a certain part to that becomes second nature once you're just kind of so engraved and doing it over and over and over and over again. Your brain sort of processes things differently. It doesn't have to think so hard about certain things, but it is one of those things. I mean, people, I think the biggest struggle, and I go through with it so much, as a hobbyist, is that now I'm at that point where I don't want to just make all these images. Like, it's really easy for me to, grab some strobes and try to paint the light and stuff like that. But I think what's hard is, like, now I'm so obsessed with Like, am I capturing a moment? Like, am I capturing, like, I always say to myself, like, if I take a picture, does it tell a story or is it just a picture?
Yeah, totally.
Right? So, like, I'm obsessed about that because for me, I have the benefit of doing it for my own, my own preference, my own fun. So because of that, I don't, I'm not commissioned to shoot anything. I shoot whatever I want. So when I take a picture of something, I want it to be like not just a picture that I can find on the internet, because I can find those pictures on the internet. I don't need them. Yeah. So I think that's like a big piece. And so when you put that into cars, that's what makes, I think that's what makes the best car images. When you can look at an image and it's not just something that somebody set up some lighting, took a picture of, and they walked away with. Yeah. When everything in that picture kind of has a story to tell, I think that's what makes some of the better images that you can, if you really think about what you remember. Yeah. Those are probably some of them.
I think that's kind of the final evolution. Well, not a final evolution, but that's my latest thought along the evolution of photography, is that storytelling. Yeah. And it's funny because that's one of the first things you learn when I took those journalism classes and those photojournalism classes. Was the very first thing was tell the story with a photo. And it's like writing, where you want to tell a story as concisely as possible, news writing anyway. Yeah. And in journalism, you want to show what's happening as concisely as possible too. And it's interesting because when you back that up a little farther, then you can get into technique, and you can blend technique and lighting and all these different aspects with storytelling. Yeah. That sometimes when you're doing spot news and journalism, I think, let me back that up. I think the best photographers keep that in their mind. They think like, well, here's somebody doing something. I could just go put a camera in their face. But if I step back here and I get the foreground of people watching them or this part of the environment or whatever, that tells more of the story. Yeah. And that's always something that I've tried to keep in my mind. But now, like you said, maybe because some of these other considerations are becoming second nature, that's something I've been really focusing on, is trying to tell that story. And I'm not there yet. I think that's a long process, and I like that, especially when you go to events and you shoot races and things like that. Right. It's a big consideration, and it's a lot of fun to like go digging and find that story and capture the environment. But yeah, the cool thing about photography, just to sum it up, I think is just you have all these evolutions. You have framing, you've got lighting, you've got subject, you've got motion, you've got blur, all these different things, and I don't think that journey ever stops. I think you're always trying to find different elements to add and the best combinations to do it.
Do you ever feel like the images you've captured in some way help shape the flow or trends of an industry?
Maybe, but I think that the imagery definitely has that potential. Yeah. I don't know if mine really do it so much. I think I've seen that before. I think when I was first getting into freelance photography, the things that Easton Chang and my buddy Steve Demmett were doing, I think they did that. They changed that paradigm. They were using off-camera lights and post-processing, and that hadn't really been done in automotive yet. So it was really cool to see that. That's what gave Importuner its like signature look back in those days. Yeah. I like that. And then seeing medium format and off-camera lighting get into skateboarding photography even earlier than that, I think shifted that paradigm. And that's something that definitely, those move the needle, Right. Some of the stuff I do now, it's interesting because I think a lot of my clients I shoot for, they just want clear, concise images they can use in ads or, things like that. So, for me, I try to portray people's products in the best light. So when I shoot for race teams, it's really just showing their car, in an exciting motion or exciting part of the track, or overtaking a competitor or whatever the case is, but really just in good lighting with nice clear colors and clean white balance. That's really been my focus lately. So I don't think any of that stuff is really moving the needle. I think maybe the quality of it and maybe the angles are moving the needle amongst other photographers, but okay. I don't think it's really shifting public perception so much. But I've seen people do that, absolutely.
Yeah. It's interesting. I still think about a lot of your editorial days where you were turning out car after car after car after car, of issue and issue and issue. So, I think in some way, maybe you're not giving yourself enough credit in the sense that you captured a lot of those images that people read, and that's what they were using. I mean, there was social media wasn't as big then. So, and I just did a podcast with Jason Whitfield.
Oh yeah.
And so one of the things that we were talking just about is, we had a good time talking about Sean Carlson and kind of the impact that he had. And what's interesting is, you don't get to always judge the impact on face value. So some of the times, you look at what his influence was to a guy like Steph, or his influence was to some of the drift teams, or in the earlier days when he was working with Samuel Humanet, or different things he brought to the industry that ultimately got passed down to a lot of different people, and what they then did to influence other people. So I guess part of me thinks, well, when you were shooting for Import Tuner and some of the magazines, and you were capturing all the different vehicles and kind of giving the people a story to read about, not just about the car, but also kind of to see what the trends really were that wasn't in their backyard and wasn't at the mall and wasn't in their local car shows, that there might have been something there that pushed on forward.
Yeah, I think there have been a couple examples where I think it's mainly that I found the right car, or found the right builder. Yeah, I found the right story, the right part of the story that I think I put out there, and I thought, well, this is going to change people's perspectives on things. Yeah. And I can't think of anything right now because I'm on the spot, but I'll think of it. Tonight I'll be laying in bed But yeah, there've been a few of those moments, I think, and it's always good to be able to do that. I mean, here's another thing too. When I used to work at Import Tuner, it was a lot of the time, I'd say 60-40% of the time, it's finding cool cars that are just cool and putting them out there. I'd say actually 70-30, and 30% of the time is finding these really cool, amazing stories, or these really interesting points of view these people have.
Yeah.
And those, I love that, and I think those are the needle movers, and they're just harder to find because it's kind of the exception to the rule. There's tons of cool cars out there, and everybody's got a cool story, but there are fewer really cool stories. And
so
when you find
I'll
those,
give you one. I'll give you one because it just came into my mind, and you and I both have a relationship with him, Rob Parsons.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. His feature is today one of my favorites of my entire career.
Yeah.
Without a doubt.
So people, I mean, everybody knows Rob Parsons, but if you don't know Rob Parsons, that's Chair Slayer. So go Google him if for some reason you've been under a rock and you have no idea. But, I think you were the one that linked us up with him. I think you did the intro between us, and he was just one of those guys that I'm like, the guy is super incredible. When you realize how hard he works, when you realize, like, honestly, I have fully functional legs, and I'm, health-wise, I'm overweight, but I have, a much better health situation than Rob does, and I've never seen anybody that works as hard as he does.
It's nuts, man, and it's crazy when you meet people like that. There's a guy in Chicago named Paul Zuba who owns a speed shop called P&L Motorsports, Motorsports, and he used to specialize in Subarus back in the day, and I don't know what he does these days, but he's a similar story. I think it might have been a birth defect in his case, but he's quote unquote handicapped, but he's in a wheelchair. And if you see this guy, if you meet him and talk to him, he's done everything from championship kart racing to actually owning and really wrenching on his own shop, running the business.
Yeah.
I mean, this guy, just the drive that this guy has to be innovative and find solutions is something that it's like Rob. Man, if everybody had that quality, just imagine the things we could do.
It would be incredible.
It's nuts, and it's interesting to me that, like, you've got these situations where some people, especially in Rob's case, your whole life. You've got the use of your legs, and then one day later in your I guess young adulthood that gets taken from you. I mean, that would crush most people, me especially. But I mean, it's like when that happened, it lit a fire under him, and he thought, I just got to keep going in a different direction. I got to do something, and it's amazing to see his accomplishments,
Oh, it's like, to me, like, even like last SEMO, we had him in our booth, and I helped him. Well, I thought I was going to go help him unload the car, just to be whatever. But he was like, no, just, here, grab this. And just, he just he throws himself around. He does exactly what he needs to do. Yeah. He grinds the car. And he does it all by himself. And what's incredible is that I've never looked at Rob after maybe, once I really met Rob and I had the opportunity to, kind of, I don't want to say talk to him. Like, once I had to experience Rob. Right?
Yeah, totally. Yeah.
You realize, like, I've never looked at him as a person with disability again. Like, you just don't, because he's you start look. I mean, he's incredible.
Yeah. We spent before that I did that feature for Super Street with his car. We were hanging out at Vortec. Vortec had helped him a lot with the build of his car.
Right.
And I think his car was there, and they were sizing it for the Super supercharger or whatever the case was. But we hung out for a day. It was him, me, and a couple of the guys from the Vortec team. And like we were going out to lunch and like in Rob's truck, and one of us would have to like grab his chair and whatever. But like by the end of that day, I forgot that he was even he had a disability, disabled. Like I just
right.
Yeah, it's nuts, man. Like you talk to somebody or you see him somewhere and you just don't. It doesn't register.
No.
You're like, oh, that's Rob.
Right. And that's exactly what I mean. Yeah.
Yeah, it's like if you've ever seen the movie Clerks, Kevin Smith movie.
Sure. Yeah.
So it's all black and white, but there's such rich dialogue in that movie that when you're finished watching it, you describe it to somebody, and then if they say to you, "Oh, the black and white movie," you think, "Yeah, it is black and white."
Black and white, right?
But you would never think it's not the defining characteristic,
Yeah.
So when you meet people whose defining characteristics are just the amount of work they do and dedication they have and perseverance, I mean, that's what matters.
But I think about because you were the one that shot that feature. Was it Import Tuner? No, I don't think so.
No, that was Super Street, yeah.
Right. So I remember reading that, and that was one of my first exposures to Rob.
Yeah.
And I remember thinking, like, this guy is incredible. Like,
yeah.
When you meet him and realize he's even more incredible than you could possibly imagine.
Yeah.
That's the hard piece about it. He's one of the hardest working people that I've seen, and he does it without any complaints, and he does it because it actually drives him nuts when he can't just do all the things he wants to do, because he would just go and go and go and go. I'm like, I remember thinking, like, at some point you got to sleep, bro. Like,
I know there have been times when I think that's gotten him into trouble. He'll just push and push and push so hard that, like, he'll just exhaust himself. Yeah, he needs to just, I mean, I think that's anybody though. I think no matter where he was in life, I think he would just that's part of his personality. It's like a defining characteristic
no doubt
of him. But yeah, that story was interesting. That was still one of my favorite stories to date. And sometimes writing and shooting and editing the photos becomes a chore. I'll be perfectly honest, especially in editorial when you've got back to back to back assignments. But when one of those comes along, man, I love that, because if it catches you in a time when you're starting to feel a little burnt out, it just totally revitalizes you. I mean, there are so many ways to write that story, and I just couldn't write it fast enough. I was so excited to do it,
Yeah.
I was so excited when it came out. That is the kind of thing that I really like, finding those stories, finding those genuine, those little moments of of realness. I love that. That's my favorite.
And I love that he inspires so many other guys. I mean, his Chair Slayer Foundation. I mean, we've helped out a little bit with it, but and I wish we could do more. But the fact that he's got this thing about trying to get people. I mean, it's such a unique take. He's not out there campaigning for to cure some disease. He's out there campaigning to give these guys an experience that they wouldn't have because nobody else cares about giving it to them.
Yeah, and I'll tell you what, if you look at anything that you do, not anything, but a lot of things that you do in life, they come down to one moment of inspiration. For me, riding in my friend's turbocharged Integra was this moment of inspiration to get into cars and, and then looking at, maybe a couple of different photos specifically in a skateboarding magazine is what made me want to take up photography. But, when you have something like what Rob's doing and you're giving people these moments of inspiration, that might be the catalyst that they need to change their entire lives.
It's incredible. When you think about that, like, that impact could last with people forever.
Totally.
So we've talked about some of the more memorable features you could think of, but how about, was there any nightmare shoots? Like anything that sticks out, you're like, that was horrible.
Oh God, there have been a few. There are some shoots that I've thought were bad, and then I saw the photos of and thought, man, this is exceptionally bad. Thankfully, those were all like the very start of my journey, but
right.
But there are some things, and it's mostly just circumstance. Like I was at Coda a couple years ago, and I had my one of my D3s and my 400 2.8 on a monopod resting against a fence like an idiot, and it fell over, and both of those things broke. That was one, and then I had a different 400 before that was on the back of a golf cart that I carelessly left on the back of a golf cart. Somebody pulled off in, and it flew off and broke, and mostly things like that. Camera straps will fail. Cameras will fall. When that kind of stuff happens, that's the beginning of like one of those nightmare scenarios, I think.
Yeah.
But I mean, fortunately, knock on wood, later in my career, I started to realize you can account for a lot of that stuff, and you can be careful and prevent a lot of that stuff. So right. Those situations have been becoming less and less, I think.
Right. Do you have any helpful advice for the talented hobbyist that maybe has some aspiration to become an automotive photographer?
Yeah, I got a bunch. It's funny. I'll try to keep it short, but I mean, if you're a hobbyist, I think some of the best photos I've seen in certain genres have come from hobbyists. You know,
Yeah.
some really good automotive photography of their cars' friends or the cars that are at their shops or whatever the case is. Absolutely, but landscape, some of the best landscape stuff I've seen, some of the best retouching I've seen has all been by hobbyists. And I think that if you really want to make your hobby your career, you have to really think about how that's gonna change from how you enjoy it now.
Right.
You know, because when you're a hobbyist, you can just take some time on a Saturday and have fun, and there's no client pressure, there's no delivery pressure. You can shoot something, retouch it 4 years later if you want. But when you're shooting professionally, you have to know exactly what you're going to deliver, and you have to be able to do it.
Yeah. Right.
And you have to know that there's a market out there. So, like, for some of my clients, I don't produce the most amazing jaw-dropping stuff. I shoot a lot of home goods, which is just stuff you see on Amazon. So it's getting like just vases and picture frames and shooting them against the white background. It's boring. It pays, but it's boring. So if you're okay with, not having the most exciting content to shoot every day,
right,
you should do it. But, if you think it's going to be amazing experiences one after the next, it's, in a gingerly timeline, it's not going to happen.
Right. Right. I get that.
Yeah.
Any other tidbits you think like this is a need to know thing, or is it kind of just experience? You got to feel your way out.
I think what you said earlier is the best, is probably the quintessential piece of advice to keep in mind, and it's just learn how the camera works.
Yeah.
If we're going to talk about technical things, I think everything starts with that. When you learn the camera functions and you learn aperture and shutter speed and ISO and that little, relationship that they have, and you learn how to work your camera without it leaving, your eye. That's the start. And anybody who wants to get into photography seriously needs to learn that, I think.
Yeah.
Because then they can start to experiment, and they'll think, well, I want shutter speed, and they'll know how to do it.
Right.
But I think that's probably the starting point, and then you can start thinking about composition, lighting, all those things. But I'm sorry, I don't really remember the actual question.
No,
you
I
asked.
think you answered it. I'm gonna go one step further, and only because I think that you've had a tremendous amount of experience, especially in the last few years, shooting some really more intense motorsport events, right?
Yeah.
And for some of the people that are interested in becoming an event photographer, not in the general sense of capturing, the crowds and stuff, but I'm talking about like going to these events, capturing these on-track events where there's very kind of strict, guidelines, and trying to, put all this stuff together, what gear you take, what kind of things how do people ease their way into that situation? Is there a way to ease your way into that situation, and kind of how do you prepare even gear-wise for that first initial thrust?
I think the first couple events, think about where you can shoot from public areas and get the shots that you want, because you'd be surprised. A lot of places, a lot of racetracks especially, you can shoot from public areas and get some amazing shots. A lot of my favorite shots have been from public areas. So I think the first mistake is thinking that you need to have media access right away. I think especially when you're learning and you want to get like that initial portfolio to pitch to clients to make, I think you could get a lot of that from just regular access as long as you're prepared well for it.
Yeah.
So think about like what areas you can go. Road Atlanta is one of those areas. It's super user friendly. COTA is another one. You can get some amazing shots from pretty much all around COTA. There's others, Laguna Seca. You can get amazing shots there. But as far as preparing for the actual shooting, I think you need to think about what shots you want to get and what focal lengths first. So 400 2.8, it's an amazing lens. You don't need to have it, but it makes a huge difference. I love that lens. You can stretch out and hit just about any corner on a racetrack, especially if you've got like the little teleconverter thingy.
Right.
But even if you had a 70 to 200, or even like the cheaper version of that, I mean, that's great for pans. You can get amazing panning shots with a mid-range or a wide. Think about what shots you want to get, what kind of equipment you're going to want to take to get it.
Right.
Think about where you're going to put all that stuff. If you're going to have like two bodies at one time, or if you want to shovel around in a backpack all day. Look at the weather, see if it's going to rain, be ready for that, because, I mean, shooting motorsports in the rain is amazing if you're ready for it. If you don't have the rain gear, you're just going to be stuck inside. But if you do have the rain gear, you get the best shots by far.
Wow.
And then look at the calendar. think about where the sun's going to fall, what corners you want to shoot in what area. Look at the race schedule, find out which cars you want to shoot are going to be on track and when. I mean, pre-production is 8/10 of it. And I think when you actually get out and shoot, the remaining 2/10 is just thinking like, just looking, trying to imagine a scene the way the camera lens is going to capture it. And just thinking about your framing and your settings. You know, do you want to have more bokeh? Do you want to have more shutter speed? You know, that kind of thing.
Right. No, I think that's good advice.
That's it. I mean, it's really, like I said, most of it you can knock out in pre-planning. And then when you're on the ground, here's the other thing too, just situational awareness. Just constantly be thinking, can I be shooting this better? You know, does this framing look good? Is this the right time of day to shoot the corner? Right. You know, is anything else happening that I should be shooting? Like, take those steps away from the viewfinder to just think about the bigger picture.
Yeah.
That's huge.
Yeah, and I think being able to move around a lot, especially when you haven't gotten a look, you know what I mean? Just having those different vantage points to kind of see where do you do better, where do you kind of have those shots that line up well. So
that's a good part, the situational awareness too. Like, you'll have in mind that you want to shoot this corner and that straight. But while you're doing that, don't forget to look around and think, well, can I shoot it from over there, or can I shoot that? You know.
Yeah. No, I think that's a big piece. So, all right, we've kept you for quite a while, so I'm gonna wrap up with a final thought. So the value of media probably is more important than ever before. Devices and cameras, you know, they pack such an incredible technology to capture media now that some could even argue that there's some sort of devaluation of the role of a traditional photographer. Mm-hmm. So I guess it's a two-part question. Do you ever feel the effects of this? And do you think that it will become more difficult as time goes on to make a living as a working photographer? Or is it one of those things that, you know, with skill and creativity, kind of you'll be able to hold, like the course will hold true?
That's a good question. That's a question I ask myself pretty much weekly. I think I do feel the effects of it now because there are so many content creators out there and so many people with cameras and so many people with good gear. And there are so many brands involved in buying content from people like me.
Right.
That the sky is the limit, not only in terms of the markets that you can sell to, but just the providers, people like me. And that drives the price down, I think. And the frequency is a big issue too. You've got to be able to shoot more, and I don't want to say for less, but in a lot of areas it's more for less. Mm-hmm. But I think there's also going to be, it's like any kind of branding where you're always going to have that market for the things that you're only going to get with a quality brand or quality provider, you know. So, for example, like look at camera straps. There's so many camera straps coming from China, varying degrees of quality. You can get anything from something super cheap that'll last you for one weekend to something that's just amazing that costs $140. And you look at it and think it's a camera strap. Why should I pay $140? Mm-hmm. And then you use it and realize it's going to last you for the rest of your life. And it's like that with photography too. You know, you can pick somebody who's got an amazing Instagram feed to shoot your campaign.
Right.
And there's a chance that they'll turn out the product that you want. Or you can pick somebody that's got a history of proven work, who's got a defined style, and somebody who's going to be available when you need them, who's going to be accountable, and who's definitely going to produce what you're looking for. Right. And if that person charges more and you're serious about getting that product, you'll be willing to pay more.
Right.
I think that's the way it is. So I'm not too worried about price driving down too much. You know, I think at this part of my career, I'm not chasing over the quantity versus quality so much. I'm starting to look more for quality versus quantity.
Right.
But I mean, who knows? Because like 20 years down the road, if artificial intelligence could knock all this stuff out, I mean,
right, we all won't have a job.
Who knows what's going to happen? You know. But in the immediate near-term future, no, I don't think so. I think it's still a good place to be.
Right. Cool. So listen, I appreciate you doing this. I know that you have plenty to do and you're kind of in between events, so it was cool to be able to catch up with you.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
I appreciate your time. Why don't you tell everybody where they can kind of find you, your website, your content, all that stuff?
So I'm just my name, Luke Munnell, at everything all over the web. So Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, though I don't really use Twitter.
Right.
My website, just everything, Luke Munnell, lukemunnell.com, at Luke Munnell. You'll find that pretty much anywhere. And I think Instagram is really the one I'm kind of like loading up on at the moment because
Everybody else is? Yeah.
Yeah, I'm not so great with my own personal social media channels these days, but when I do post, it's on Instagram, and then I'll update my site once every like 6 months or so. But
right,
that's the best way to do it. Email, just lukemunnell@gmail.
Yeah, for sure. And you really need to, if you're not familiar with Luke's work, go check out his website, and then definitely take out his Instagram account, because he's got some images there that will certainly leave you with a lasting impression.
I appreciate that. I'm going to start doing more of that too in the future, is my plan anyway. So
I know that's everybody's plan. It's hard,
right? It is.
It takes so much time, and it's such a necessary evil, but it does take a lot of time.
I know, it's true. We're going to brand ourselves these days.
That's exactly what it is. All right, so that's it. That's it for this one. For more info on the podcast, head over to konigwheels.com/podcast. You can catch us on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube at Konig Wheels USA. If you like what we're doing here, please subscribe. You can find us on YouTube, iTunes, and Google Play. That's it. We're out of here. Peace.
Thanks, Scott.